The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone. Good afternoon to you. My name is White. CML's Membership Services Manager, and it is a pleasure to have you today participating in today's webinar. We're going to give you a preview of what's going on starting tomorrow, believe it or not, during the 2018 legislative session. For those of you that are elected officials, you will receive one virtual training credit that will be allocated to your record here at CML. We are also recording the webinar and we'll post that on our website probably sometime tomorrow. For those of you who are not familiar with the webinar process, you should see a control panel to the top right of the screen. You have an orange arrow to the left of that panel, and that will minimize the entire box. We are muting all of you during the webinar, but we ask you to feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Feel free to type them in if you have any questions or want more information about anything. We'd be happy to address questions at the end of the webinar. So at this time, I'm going to kick off to my colleague Kevin Bomber, who is Director. He'll introduce his mechanism as we go along. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate your participation.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to welcome you to the webinar again. Thanks for participating. And like Lisa said, when we get to the end, any questions typed in along the way, we'll talk about. We're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the issues that municipalities are going to be facing in the upcoming legislative session. And I'll start off by letting you know who you are going to be listening to today. Myself, Kevin Bomber, I'm the Deputy Director. I'm joined by my colleagues, Diane Criswell, who's our Legislative Counsel, Morgan Cullen, who's Legislative Policy Advocate, and Megan Dollar. The four of us are our advocacy team down at the State House. Just a quick shot on our website. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but you can follow all of our legislative action at www.cml.org. On the top right of the screen where it says legislative, you can click on the legislative session, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what you can find on there. But essentially, you can follow all the legislation that CML is following, as well as proposed bills, and then any memos that are written on legislation that we hand out to legislators. So we're going to jump right into just another note on this. So those bills we're following as they start to get introduced, probably towards the end of this week or beginning of next week, more likely, then the links on our legislative page will begin to populate with bills and bill numbers and all of that. So we'll jump right into issues affecting municipalities. We'll start with the state's budget. I'm going to ask Diane in a second here, but just a couple of main things that have been issues over the past few years that we're going to again see either part of the discussion, hopefully in some part of the budget. First of all, transportation. I mean, Morgan's going to talk a little bit about that later, but everyone's well aware of the backlog of transportation projects that got failure in the session to come up with anything that allow voters to choose a statewide solution. That's going to continue to dominate the discussion this year. Severance tax bills into the budget or the state budget. We're not so much concerned about that this year. However, there's some severance tax impacts we'll talk about later. So relates to the next item. Hospital provider. You may recall in the last session, there's an omnibus bill that was any purpose to create an enterprise program in the hospital provider fee program. That took the revenue off of the TABOR revenue calculation and allows for room for the cap now, which everyone's going to be trying to spend this session, but it does not free us up completely, and Diane's going to be able to illustrate that more in a second. And so I'm going to ask Diane just to mention a couple issues related to the telegram, and then we'll go into TABOR and videos on the next slide.
For the telegram, some of you might recall in 2017, the residential assessment rate was adjusted. So if you are a property tax nerd like me, that means something to you. But without a whole lot of detail, the Gallagher Amendment set up its calculations of residential property, commercial property, blah, blah, blah. But what that means is that the residential assessment rate is directed by those constitutional provisions and then adopted every other year in statute by the legislature. Now, the long-standing residential assessment rate was 7.96%. Last year, because the residential market in Colorado is hot, the residential assessment rate actually goes down somewhat commensurate with that. So it went down to 7.2% in 2017, and the most recent forecast by Legislative Council, the nonpartisan entity that does the forecasting for the legislature, forecast that it will go down in 2019. So it's adjusted every 2 years. It will go down to, the forecast now is 6.11. So we'll be, that's just kind of a teaser to you folks. It won't probably be something, at least the assessment rate is not something that's set to be adjusted until 2019, but we'll be watching it, and it will greatly affect everybody that it imposes on property tax. The next slide is also from the Legislative Council's recent forecast. They do quarterly forecasts. And what this shows is kind of the state's TABOR expenditure cap calculations. Kevin mentioned that by moving the enterprise fund out from underneath the state's TABOR expenditure cap, which is now referred to as Ref C cap, what that means is the state is not as likely to be in a TABOR refund scenario. We're not going to hit the TABOR expenditure cap. However, what's changed recently is the Federal Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So you can see on this slide, they broken down by fiscal year, kind of middle left is where we're going to be under the TABOR cap for the state side. And so the hospital provider enterprise in the 2017 legislative session meant that we hit that cap and kind of provided some near-term relief. It's not a forever solution, it provided some near-term relief. The numbers that are in the trends next to those fiscal year breakouts are what they were forecasting at the kind of in the December timeline before that federal tax act was enacted. And it actually means that we are likely to hit the TABOR cap more quickly than we would have otherwise. And I've had a few friends ask me, so why would that be, Diane? Why does the federal tax cut bill mean that the state of Colorado is going to get more money? Well, the reason is that the Federal Tax and Jobs Act actually broadened the federal income tax base by making changes like removing exemptions and deductions and the like. And then the feds reduced the rate of tax. But our tax remains the same. Our tax rate remains the same, but the base is broadened. So, what that means in kind of the near, kind of long-term outlook for municipal governments is that we'll be back in a TABOR refund scenario, sooner, and we're going to really need to watch our energy impact funds.
And I'll get to that in a minute, but it's worth noting on that when you'll see in the middle right there where it says TABOR surplus, that's when we conceded our revenue accounting, but the legislature responded by reducing the hospital provider reimbursement. At that point in time, did count the TABOR cap, but also transferring $25 million of severance tax into the general fund to pay for TABOR refunds. Serious concern to energy impacted communities. We'll come back to that later.
Did you want me to do this one too?
Mhm.
So for those of you that haven't kind of tracked TABOR, or maybe your municipality is debruced in part or in total, a lot of folks don't really think through on the state side, why is it so difficult to be in a TABOR refund scenario? And the thing that makes it really difficult is all funds that aren't, that TABOR's definition of the funds that are subject to its limits is pretty broad. It includes general funds and then cash funds like money from fees and other sources. But money from fees is usually, it really should be limited in its use for related activities. And so it doesn't really spend, it's not really green money. You have to use it for those uses. And so when you do TABOR refunds, they generally come out of the general fund. And so you have to reduce your general fund expenditures in order to fund those refunds.
Okay, we'll jump into some of the issues now and talk a little bit about them. And you'll hear from each of the lobbyists and the issues that they cover. I get to start with beer and liquor. It's going to be a very busy session with beer and liquor legislation. Here's two of the issues that we're tracking. You recall from 2016 session, in order to avoid an initiative going to the ballot, there was a deal made in Senate Bill 197 that year that created a process for grocery stores, which were limited to one liquor license, drugstore license in the entire state, to be able to acquire multiple ones. And there were a whole bunch of associated deals that went along with that. Some folks that participated in that deal making are just now realizing some of the deals that they made. And one of them is that everyone with a fermented malt beverage license, a 3-2 license, so convenience stores and grocery stores that keep their 3-2 license, on 1/1/19, the definition of fermented malt beverage changes to malt liquor without anything else being required. Those licensees will be able to sell full-strength beer and other malt liquors on January 1st, 2019. And needless to say, there's some concern from a number of circles, but from the municipal angle, 500-foot distance restrictions from schools and the ability to consider new licenses and their proximity to existing liquor license establishments like retail liquor stores, liquor license drugstores, and other fermented malt beverage licensees. Those are things that we've asked for. We are assured by sponsor will be in a bill that's going to come in the session, but there's a whole lot of other folks asking for pieces of it too. More to come on that, but it's a bit of a house of cards right now. There's also a rulemaking that was proposed in the Liquor Enforcement Division over the summer that would have eliminated the ability for municipalities to hold special event permits for events that they put on. And it was brought up because it's questionable whether or not there was ever statutory authority for that rule to exist in the first place. So CML requested the LED not go forward with the rulemaking while we got the legislative authority in statute, and CML's initiating legislation. We've secured a sponsor and the ability of municipalities and additionally special districts to be able to hold special events and issue those permits to themselves will be retained. Broadband, that's also going to be a very dynamic issue this session, focused primarily at this point, we believe, on one bill that would repurpose the high-cost support mechanism primarily for the purpose of funding for rural broadband. It does increase the threshold population for purposes of defining unserved areas from 5,000 to 7,500 and has some other factors that apply, but that means there's going to be more municipalities, if those other factors apply, that would be eligible and the providers that want to provide broadband in those areas eligible to provide broadband services or receive grants. Does not address right of first refusal problems. And what are those? Right now, the incumbent provider, which in most cases is CenturyLink, is given the right to a first refusal on whether or not they want to take on a service upgrade that would be part of a broadband grant. That's related to, created some problems in that in one particular instance, a grant was issued to upgrade to high-speed broadband. CenturyLink said, no, we'll do it. They got the money and put in essentially a DSL service with much slower. So that's still a problem we need to work on. But really, one of the key things that doesn't, at this point, and we don't anticipate any preemption language. And what do I mean by that? I mean preemption of municipal authority under Senate Bill 152 and counties to ask voters for permission to investigate entering into provision of telecom broadband services, or at least financing the infrastructure. We have 86 municipalities and 37 counties that have had such elections. So no preemption language, that's good news, and probably a chance to get something positive done on broadband funding during this session. Handing it off to Megan now.
Thank you. So starting a little bit talking about housing. Much like the last few years, affordable housing is going to remain a very popular and important subject in the 2018 legislature. The thriving Colorado market right now that Diane alluded to is really affecting market rates and home values to the point where the funding of affordable housing is becoming extremely pertinent. And so there will certainly be legislation this year looking at a permanent funding source for affordable housing. There, whether that's through a documentary fee or some other way remains to be seen. But we do believe that CML will certainly be supporting legislation to establish that funding. Another program that has been very great in the past is the state low-income housing tax credit that's administered through CHAFA. That's been a program that's been in place since about 2014 and has led to almost 4,000 units being built as a result. And what that money does is really provide gap funding for developers to make more lucrative investments outside of just using the federal low-income tax credit as well. So that's something that CML will continue to support moving forward, the reauthorization of that program. Speaking of reauthorizations, the Colorado Division of Lottery is up for sunset in, I believe, 2021. So proponents of the lottery program, GOCO, CML, CCI, as well as DOLA have all partnered together in a coalition to go ahead and get that division reauthorized to make sure that that is clean moving forward, since they do collect the lottery revenues for our parks and recreation funds that we utilize in every municipality. And so CML will play a very large role in assuring that that gets reauthorized, and not only just reauthorized for this year, but a permanent reauthorization so that there will be some security for that.
Well, like beer and liquor, marijuana is going to be a very active topic this session, and probably every session going forward. I want to pause just because I didn't add it in on the slide here, but there's been a lot of conversation about the Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General's memo, rescinding the Cole memo and all other memos, and what that means for marijuana in Colorado. Basically, at this point, CML's perspective is that not much is going to change, at least in the short term, based on the comments of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Colorado, USA Troyer, who has said that the priorities in which his office has been prosecuting are essentially the same as what AG Sessions' memo talks about. It was unfortunate that the Cole memo was rescinded in that it provided specific guidance for areas of priority enforcement, particularly in ensuring no diversion to children and no crossing state boundaries. But bottom line, in the short term, we don't see anything changing, probably even in the longer term, and that would impact marijuana businesses in Colorado authorized under state law and the Constitution. What the long-term effect is, don't know. Certainly the uncertainty is a problem, as well as some potential uncertainty in the banking world. So just a note on that for those who have been following that discussion over the past few days. Back to legislation. On-premise consumption is, in our opinion, going to continue to be introduced as legislation until it passes. And so we've taken the approach that whatever is going to pass needs to have maximum local control, and following Amendment 64 and statutory provisions that implemented it. This session, we're anticipating legislation creating accessory consumption premises for both medical and retail, purely opt-in at the local level, either by council or board action, or by referred measure or initiative, and the ability for the licensing municipality to be more stringent. There are a number of components to this bill, and currently the league is, based on the last draft we saw, will be opposed unless amended. If a municipality does want to opt into this, then it needs to function properly. And right now there's some conflicts and problems within the last draft, and I expect that to be addressed, hopefully, before it's introduced. But the key to this bill is that it is meant to allow existing licensees, either medical marijuana dispensaries or retail stores, to have a separate premises that is tied to their license, but not physically, because it would be anywhere. It would have to be disconnected physically from the store. So a model that obviously benefits those who are already licensed, and that'll be a business model I'm sure will be heartily discussed during the session. Anyway, on-premise consumption, I expect that bill to be around the entire session and probably go through a number of changes along the way. Just found out the other day there will be a proposed delivery pilot program. This one is a little vague still, but essentially would create the option for the Marijuana Enforcement Division to allow 3 municipalities or contiguous areas applying for as one to permit delivery of retail and or medical marijuana with sunset in 2 years, and would create then a new local license type for delivery during that period. It is silent on whether or not deliveries would be allowed extraterritorially, but the idea from the proponents, as I understand it, is that delivery would only be allowed in those areas that have signed an MOU with the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Still a lot of ground to cover on this. This is an attempt to reopen the door that was slammed shut pretty hard by the legislature last year on full-on cross-jurisdictional delivery. It's okay.
All right, so there will definitely be some issues surrounding municipal courts this year. One that is CML initiated, taking advantage of the $2 million that the governor's office set aside in order to fund House Bill 16-1309, which requires defense counsel at the first appearance if someone is in custody in municipal court. We expect to work with the Department of Local Affairs on a program and make it as easy as possible for municipalities to get reimbursed for funds that they spend due to that bill. And we are working with the ACLU right now with the hope of getting either their support or neutrality. Additionally, we're actually working with a number of stakeholders because legislation regarding criminal justice reform will certainly be at the forefront in 2018. There were several interim committees that, two interim committees that met over the interim to discuss sentencing reform and lowering prison and jail populations. And so CML has been part of those discussions and are utilizing a lot of our members in those as well. And so we expect that to be a huge issue moving forward in 2018.
In the area of municipal tax and finance, there's a couple things that I anticipate. One is a bill that is coming out of the sales tax task force, say that 3 times fast, that's directing the Department of Revenue to issue requests for information, RFI, for tax vendors. That would be something that's kind of directed to those home rule self-collecting municipalities. If you have any questions about that, just let me know, but we'll be watching that bill. Then every year that I've been at the league, and I understand from my colleagues that have been around longer, There is generally a business personal property tax relief bill of some sort. So they generally will do, the proposals will, exempt the first, 15,000, the first 50,000. But anyway, it's not a popular tax with businesses, and what we generally do when we lobby those is we just explain what the fiscal impacts would be. And with that, next slide, Morgan.
Go ahead.
So the 2017 session, we saw a lot of legislation introduced on oil and gas issues. I suspect we're going to see even more this year, and that's in light of two incidents that happened last year. You may recall late last March, the Firestone incident in Weld County that occurred. It was a flow line, severed flow line that was connected to an active well that caused a home explosion and killed 2 people. The other was a Colorado Court of Appeals decision that was handed down, known as the Martinez decision, that stated that general health, safety, and welfare of Colorado residents is a condition that needs to be met before oil and gas activities can be permitted. Both of these things are going to put a highlight or put public safety as it relates to oil and gas under a microscope. And for that reason, we're going to see, I think, a plethora of legislation designed to improve public safety. Areas like increased setback requirements, regulation and treatment of flow lines, treatment of orphan and abandoned wells, public mapping requirements, and methane leak detection programs will all be legislation that will be introduced in 2018. In addition to that, and outside the scope of public safety, we'll probably see some bills on severance tax and some reforms to forced pooling requirements. And then there's 2 additional pieces of legislation that the CML Policy Committee has already taken an active position on. The first is up there on the slide. It has to do with compensation for mineral interests. It's legislation that's been introduced in various forms over the past 3 sessions by Representative Perry Buck, and it holds local governments liable to mineral owners for any kind of moratorium on oil and gas development within their communities. And CML will be taking an opposed position on that. The second has to do with setback requirements from schools. Right now, the setback requirement is it's a 1,000-foot setback from a school building, but just due to the fact that schools utilize all of the property within their vicinity for ball fields and playgrounds and modular classrooms, the proposed legislation would increase that setback from the school property line, not the school building itself. And that bill was introduced last year, and the bill sponsor, Representative Mike Foote, intends to reintroduce that again this year as well, and CML will be taking a support position.
One that we didn't include on there because we haven't seen the details yet is Senator Matt Jones is planning on reintroducing what he calls a PROTECT Act. At this point, we believe that's going to look a lot like some legislation from 2 years ago, and more on that when it comes out, but it actually gave local governments more authority on siting than they have now. We supported that bill 2 years ago, so we'll see what happens when that bill comes in.
There's a couple changes that are coming up for the Fire and Police Pension Association. Most of these are just kind of administrative procedural changes, including legislation to allow the FPPA to implement an electronic health history form statewide, to allow them to consider pre-existing conditions even if they were not included on the enrollment forms, and some simplification procedures for employers who want to affiliate with the FPPA. There's also been a lot in the news about PARA, the Public Employee Retirement Association. Now, we don't have very many municipalities that participate in para. I believe there are 26, but 27, pardon. But for those members, and also for those of you that might just be kind of pension nerds, that the para program or the para funds are not as structurally sound as some states and more than others. But there's been a lot of discussion over the near term as the economy improved and state revenues kind of bounced back from the downturn. Should para contribution rates be adjusted to improve the financial structural outlook for those funds? And so the para board came out with its recommendations. There were also different proposals included in the governor's budget. And, you know, I could talk through the weeds there, but, you know, varying iterations of employee contribution increases, employer contribution increases. The other thing that the board recommended is implementing in statute some automatic triggers for future years. So in addition to near-term statutory increases, putting in these automatic triggers so that if they kind of get into trouble again, that they wouldn't have to do anything and seek legislative approval, they would just be automatic. So with this kind of choose your own adventure set of possibilities in Paraland, we have kind of our group of 27 municipalities. With them, took some recommendations to the policy board and articulated our kind of policy positions for para for this year, which is basically opposing additional employer contributions to the local government division, which is better funded than a lot of the other divisions. Support keeping employee contributions for new and existing employees the same, because some of the versions of the proposals had them different. Support a reduction in the proposed employee contribution for the local government division. I think there's some recognition that the employee contribution, even in our division, needs to go up, but I'm not sure that it needs to go up commensurate with some of the other divisions. And then retaining the discretion to oppose those automatic future triggers. Just a lot of concern about how that might affect our legislative priorities, especially in downturns, and then really creating a whole nother set of potential uncontrollable budget triggers similar to TABOR, Gallagher, and some of the other things that make our fiscal policy choices so difficult in municipal governments.
So on the public safety end, one of the biggest issues that's going to be discussed this year is the opioid epidemic, and particularly its impacts on Colorado, of course. And I know a lot of our municipalities have felt those impacts as well on law enforcement and hospitals and other things of that nature. So in the interim, a interim committee met to discuss options for funding to reduce the impacts of the opioid crisis. And what they did is really look at substance abuse as a whole as well. And so out of that committee, CML is supporting a couple of bills. One that provides funding to substance abuse programs provided by the state, and another one that allows for behavioral health individuals or individuals that participate in behavioral health studies to get their, What it allows is for individuals that use behavioral health or that are nurses or doctors within that industry to allow to get their student loans forgiven. And so the intent is to provide more individuals that can give these services and substance abuse services in rural areas. And CML is certainly supporting that, and will certainly be following any other opioid or opiate legislation throughout the legislative session.
So ultimately, Morgan will be handling severance tax and FML going forward, but I've got 10 plus years of battle scars on this one, and we've referenced the slide before that showed the graph of where the TABOR cap was and when we might approach it. There are some realities to the state budget, and based on our history, some realities to what we expect would happen with severance tax when we eventually exceed the TABOR cap like we did in 2015. As I mentioned, the changes in the hospital provider fee and the budget drivers that Diane talked about, more revenue coming in, put severance tax at risk. That impacts both local governments, energy impacted communities in particular, and the Department of Natural Resources that receives most of its funding for critical environmental programs and water supply grants and loans from severance tax. What we expect will happen, as it happened in 2015, is, especially without hospital provider fee revenue to tinker around with, when the state of Colorado eventually exceeds its TABOR cap again, that the General Assembly will go after severance tax to backfill any TABOR refunds. And as we saw in 2008 to 2013, when the state was in a recession, a down cycle, approximately $400 million of local government severance tax specifically was diverted and backfilled the general fund so that the state didn't have to cut programs. In both instances, severance tax was treated like a piggy bank. That's a problem. So the League is proposing, and we believe we have a legislator that will introduce, it's not yet confirmed, but a question to, would have to be a referred question, but legislation that would refer a question to voters to de-bruce severance tax revenue so that it is taken once and for all off of the TABOR calculation in the same manner that hospital provider fee was, by making it an enterprise. There's some strings attached to that, though, in order to retain the de-bruce status going forward. The severance tax would have to continue to be used only for its current statutory intended purposes, local governments and the Department of Natural Resources, and you would not be able to impact tax rates or credits going forward. A difficult proposition in any respect, because it would have to be done at the ballot in the face of massive opposition and insert dollar signs there from the oil and gas industry. But we want to ensure that rates and credits wouldn't be impacted in order to protect that de-bruce status. Doesn't mean that both of those things or one or the other couldn't happen. The state could swipe the money, or there could be a change in rates and credits, but but the penalty would be losing the de-bruce status and the freedom that helps state budget writers, or would give them. So we'll see how that goes forward. It's an ambitious proposal, but obviously one intended to help protect the state budget against the rapid spikes and dips of severance tax, and more importantly, in our opinion, energy impacted communities.
So I think all parties in the State House have come to consensus on transportation in the fact that we need it. We need to have additional revenue streams for transportation to meet our long-term infrastructure goals and the rapid population growth that's occurring across the state. I think the challenge is where the revenue comes from. One of the good things that came out of the 2017 session was the legislature passed Senate Bill 267 that created or provided an additional $1.9 billion in infrastructure funding for state roads. The bad news is that's only about 10% of the revenue that's needed to deal with our transportation challenges, and none of that money goes to meet local infrastructure needs. So that being said, we're going to see some legislation again in 2018 Republicans will introduce legislation for infrastructure funding that relies on existing revenue, and then you'll see Democrats working on legislation probably similar to House Bill 1242 that ended up dying last year, that was a referred measure to Colorado voters for an increase in sales tax revenue as a dedicated stream of funding for transportation. So that being said, it didn't pass last year. This year is an election year. I think the real action will probably happen on the 2018 ballot in the form of an initiative. The Denver Chamber of Commerce has already signaled that they're working on putting a coalition together to put an initiative on the ballot similar to House Bill 1242, which would provide a quote-unquote statewide solution for transportation funding, 45% of the revenue going to CDOT, a 20-20 split for cities and counties, and then a 15% multimodal, 15% going to multimodal as well. So traffic safety is another issue that is going to be a theme in 2018. The governor's office is going to be working on legislations making seatbelts a primary offense, so law enforcement can pull over a vehicle that isn't using a seatbelt. And then speed limits is a issue that is going to get that CCI is working on, and it's dealing with broadening the criteria for local governments. Right now, local governments can raise or lower speed limits in their jurisdiction, but they have to use a traffic study to do it. And this would broaden the criteria to take in factors like number of pedestrians, the amount of growth that's occurring in an area, environmental implications, that type of thing. And then distracted driving seems to be a perennial theme in the legislature ever since the advent of the smartphone. So we'll probably see seeing some additional legislation there as well. Utilities. So 811, the call before you dig program. This is an issue that's occurred over the summer, and it has to deal with several extenuating circumstances that has developed. Senator Ray Scott has had a working group over the course of the summer that put together a series of reforms for Colorado's 811 one-call system that excavators use to let folks know that first they are going to be excavating and then also request a locate. What their reforms center around is the tiered membership of 811 right now. You have Tier 1 and Tier 2 membership. This would require all members become Tier 1 members. And then oversight and enforcement authority. It would create a statewide commission, a 12-member board that would have oversight and enforcement authority of the one-call system. So this was the initial draft that was put forward. There was a stakeholder meeting at the Capitol late or early November, and all stakeholders had an opportunity to submit comment. And we were working with our counterparts over at CCI, SDA, and municipal utilities. And so the cost of Tier 1 membership is an issue for local governments. The constitutionality of having a statewide state commission with oversight and enforcement authority of municipally owned infrastructure is an issue. Representation on that commission, making sure that municipalities will have a seat at the table. And then responsibilities for locates. Who's going to pay for locates for infrastructure that's connected to municipally owned utilities?
So that is some, not all, that represents some, not all of the issues that we expect to come up in the legislative session. I'm going to talk a little bit about staying connected to the State House. I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions about any issues that we either talked about or something that's on your mind didn't talk about, just send us a question in the window provided there under questions. And don't see any yet, so we're going to go ahead and continue on through this section, but feel free to type in questions you have as we wrap up here.
So I want to talk a little bit about how CML and the lobbyists keep you informed throughout the legislative session. Probably the biggest way you can stay informed is making sure you're signed up to receive the CML State House report. You'll get that on a weekly basis with updates on all the legislation that we're tracking. And we are going to add a few new things this year, including some videos directly from the lobbyists to kind of give a firsthand take of what's going on that week down at the legislature. And I believe you can sign up for the State House report on the website. And while you're at the website, you can also check out our legislative page that has our box scores as well as our position papers. Our box score contains all the bills we're supporting, opposing, and following in general, as well as, and then our position papers are what we are passing out to the legislature in order to advocate our position. And so that's a great resource for our members as well. If anyone ever has any questions on what's on the website or any of the issues on the position paper or any of the issues at all, please feel free to contact any of us here on the lobbying team. We are happy to speak with you directly as well. Social media in general is also a really great opportunity to stay informed. CML does have a Facebook page and a very active Twitter account, and we do real-time update on a lot of legislative issues throughout the session. And so make sure to follow that. When the session's wrapped up, the lobbyists get together and put together our annual Colorado Laws Enacted. And that's when we look at the bills that have actually passed the legislature and how those may impact municipalities moving forward. So look for that at the end of the session. Also during the session, there's opportunity for some of our bigger issues. We do put information in our CML newsletter to kind of reach the largest audience, and so we do utilize that on a bi-weekly basis. And finally, if there is an opportunity, Colorado Municipalities Magazine has also in the past followed some legislative issues, and we do have one coming out soon that is going to be on public safety specifically. So look for that as well.
And also, as it relates to the State House report, those of you who've received it in the past, you'll see it's going to look a little different this coming session. It'll have a different look, but I think the most exciting feature is going to be the video component. So you get to see lobbyists talking about things that we do. And if that's not exciting, I don't know what is. So let's talk about something else that's exciting, grassroots advocacy. This is where you come in. And for those of you who share some of this with your colleagues, this is a piece that we'd like you to spread to others as well, because while there are 4 of us, and we certainly are pleased and work to represent you in the State House, each of our member municipalities and the people in it have a connection to the representatives and senators that represent you in the State House, and they listen. So there are a couple of pieces here on this, and we'll just run through them real quick.
This is some tips on how to contact your legislator, and I'm just going to build, this is Diane, I'm just going to build on what Kevin said, which is this will be my 3rd year lobbying at the League, and as much as I would like to think of myself as being very persuasive and dynamic, when I see our members in front of the legislator or talking to legislators, you guys have such an amazingly strong impact, and legislators really care about their local elected officials, their municipal employees, their communities. So don't discount that. If there's an issue that you're concerned about locally, It's great if you coordinate with us, and then also if you are moved to contact your legislator, here's some ideas of how to do it. There's a bunch of ways of figuring out who's your legislator. The legislature's website has like district lookups and other stuff like that. When we have it on our website as well. Megan just reminded me. Thank you, Megan. Now, as far as the types of contact, in person is great. And so if your legislator, if you guys are holding a breakfast for your colleagues in the Colorado General Assembly and similar, making that face-to-face contact is a great idea. You can also, if you're not hosting, you can always look at hosting them. A lot of municipalities do set up breakfasts or invite these folks to their council or board meetings. Our legislature is truly a citizen legislature. These guys answer their phones and answer their own emails. So if you are wondering who's going to get that call, who's going to get that email, it very well may be your legislator. And they will, when they've got bills that are scheduled for action and they are watching the traffic come in on the phone and over email, so reach out to them. Also, CML every February hosts a legislative workshop, and we set it up, you can register, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But also, we encourage our members to invite their colleagues in the Colorado General Assembly and really to encourage and foster those relationships. So, keep us informed, keep us involved, and don't discount your own importance to your colleagues in the Colorado General Assembly.
P.S. Registration for the legislative workshop is actually open right now, so you'll find that on the events page. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so what should you say? Well, first of all, just let them know about the policy issues that will affect your municipality. As Diane said, you guys have a tremendous amount of credibility as decision makers in your community. So use that to your advantage. And then refer to CML positions on bills. And all of that information is available on our website. And then we also write position papers on a lot of them as well, which will provide more detail for you as well. After that, feel free to reach out to any of the CML lobbyists for additional detail on any of the issues that we spoke about today, and they will be happy to help you out. And then always at the end, make sure that you ask them for their vote. That's really important.
So now you know how to get in touch with them, what you should say. Also, we like to just remind folks when you contact your legislators on how to say it, how to say what you're going to say. And the 10 Commandments of Effective Relations are something that we certainly follow and encourage our members to as well. As Diane mentioned, these are citizen legislators, and right now, 12 of them have come from municipal government, were former council members, and so they will understand you. But how you approach a legislator and talk to them is really critical. Number one, become aware of legislation. Realize that you, as a municipal official, have to spend time knowing about proposed legislation. And legislative action and intergovernmental relations is one of the most important aspects of your job. We provide legislative updates like you've been, we talked about in this webinar, and so there's certainly information out there. But we also encourage you to assign someone the specific task of watching legislation and reviewing league materials and communicating with the league and knowing everything you can about legislation. Really, mentioned before, get to know your legislators, meet with them informally. Best way to be able to approach them during the session is when you've already talked to them about just what's going on in your community, how things are going. Go to their district events or invite them, as Diane mentioned, into events that you're hosting. And that way, when you call them to ask for something, that relationship is already established. Number three, be well informed on the issues. Certainly, if you have information on something that you're advocating, it should be precise and concise. If you can quantify the impact of a proposed bill and explain how it will affect specific projects or policies, that's really critical to legislators. to have and know how those impacts will be felt locally, positive or negative. Also communicate regularly and be persistent. Constant communication is vital. Communicate with your legislators on a regular year-round basis, not just when an emergency arises. That ties back to what I was saying before. It really key, and it's unfortunate how often we see this, not from our folks, but from others in the State House. Never badger, bully, or certainly threaten a legislator. The personal visit is the best way to do it, followed by a telephone call or an email, then a letter. We usually advise against using resolutions. They can be impactful on big issues, but if they happen too often, they sort of lose their significance. Coalitions, working with outside groups, absolutely. Media service clubs, community-wide organizations, your local chamber, that can be a great group to work with, or a set of groups to work with. Keep them informed of your positions and be aware of theirs as well. When those align, and this ties right into number 6, you can have very powerful coalitions. They can work, but be cautious. Sometimes coalitions come together quickly, but they can also come apart just as quickly. Probably should be number 1, but always say thank you. Don't forget to say thank you, even when they say, sorry, I'm not with you, or worse. Just say thank you for your time, thank you for what you do, appreciate you listening. A thank you note, some sort of personal recognition is a great way to solidify relationships. Act quickly. Boy, is this huge. We've seen over the years things that we've been able to get done or keep from being done because we were able to act quickly. That works for you all as well. If you delay action, a bill can pass or fail before your municipality has a chance to provide input. So don't get hamstrung on process if you can avoid it. It's important to be involved before a decision is already made. And please, please, please keep the league informed. When you schedule meetings with your legislators, write them letters, hear from them, keep us informed. We try to do the same with you, and helps us all with municipal issues across the board. And last, finally, remember the ABCs. Important because this webinar is going on a little long. Accuracy, brevity, and courtesy. 3 most important things you can remember when dealing with legislators. Make sure you give them accurate and concise information. If you don't know the answer, say, I'm sorry, I don't know that. I'll get back to you. Don't shoot from the hip, and never, never, never give out false information. Be brief and to the point. Don't ramble on. Legislators are besieged with information, especially in this electronic age, and they appreciate someone who gets it right, gets to the point. We call it the 30-second elevator speech. If you can get on an elevator, tell a legislator what they need to know, why you support or oppose something, and ask for their vote before the door opens at the top, that's a 30-second elevator speech. And just finally, courtesy means treating your legislators as you'd like to be treated by your own constituents. Cities and towns certainly don't operate in a vacuum. What one municipality does can affect other cities and towns, and I think it goes without saying municipal officials have an institutional responsibility to recognize this fact. We're all working together for the same goals, and so being able to communicate effectively and have our legislators be helpful in that regard to the extent that they want to be and can be, certainly important. So if you want to be part of all of this action inside the State House, again, CML State House report, also have a CML Legislative Matters blog, which will start ramping up here. That's where we can be a little bit more freewheeling than we might be in a newsletter article. The State House report, a little bit more opinion involved with that. And we've obviously talked about our legislative workshop. If you want to come join us at the State House, whether you have a bill you're there to testify on or just want to see what's going on, let us know. We'd be happy to partner up with you and give you a tour or accompany you. Make sure you get on the floor to see your legislator or have an opportunity to visit with them. That's all that we have at this time. I'm just going to stop and see if there's any questions here. If you need a couple minutes, have any questions, please feel free to enter them. Meg, can you maybe come over and help me with this? I see one, but I can't quite open it up. Will the PowerPoint be available online following the webinar? Yes, it will be. We are recording this. It'll be available online and after about 24 hours. So that will be available to you. Any other questions? There's more. I think that opened up. Open the box. Technical difficulties, please stand by. I see some other questions here. I'm just trying to get them opened. Let's see. What is the status of the Marijuana Research and Development Center's license? At this time, I'm not aware of any legislation dealing with marijuana research and development centers. So, Lori, if there's something more specific, you can communicate with me on that. Get back to me directly, kbomber@cml.org, or give me a call here at the League. Another question, with the liquor changes, do we expect to see resolution to the issue with parks not related to special events? Yes. Yeah, very, very good question. 3.2 fermented malt beverages have special consideration in the liquor code, and that municipalities can allow them in parks, and also with state parks as well. And by changing to full-strength beer, the definition, it would allow municipalities to prohibit or allow fermented malt beverages, but with that now being full-strength beer, that presents an issue. Associated with that is the fact that some of the wine and spirits industries want to ensure that if beer is going to be allowed in parks, it's going to be full-strength beer now, that it would also be wine and spirits or none of the above. That issue will not be dealt with in the bill that I spoke of, at least according to the sponsor, but we do expect it to come up separately, and it needs to, at least in terms of the ambiguity that's existing in the statute. Any other questions? Well, I think that's it. We're out of time. If you have any questions of us directly, you can go to our website and find our email, kbomber@cml.org, mcullen@cml.org, dcriswell@cml.org, mdollar@cml.org, or give us a call. The numbers are there. Be happy to chat with you about any of these issues, and please do stay in touch with us during the session. Thanks so much for participating, and have a great afternoon.